be a description of the Quickdraw Weaving program's ability to display a drawdown using a gradient warp and or gradient weft. Now this is a conventional pattern where of the warp threads is shown in a fixed color. This is normal processing. This is the standard WIF file formats. Now if I go to the color menu, I'll talk about how these get there in a moment, but when I select the warp image, so I can tell that I'm using a warp image, and I'm not using a weft image yet. Now the Use Images box comes up. When I click that, what you'll now notice is that the warp threads no longer match the color on top. In this particular case, it starts out as kind of an orange, goes through yellow, through green. And now what I ended up doing to show a gradient thread, to view it as each individual point, each warp thread going down where it crosses each weft thread, I use an image in the background that identifies each pixel, what the background warp color would be at that point. So for example, if I just fill the tie up, if I'll fill a tie up with solids, that would be the warp image I'm playing with. If I undo that, so I'm back to the pattern, and now I've actually overlaid the solid craft. Now, this is kind of a compromise, because it struck me the more I played with this, trying to actually create that image based on, there's an infinite number of variables as you go through it, and this was a reasonable compromise to let you see what the effect is without me going crazy trying to figure out how to create that image. So the way I actually created the particular image we're looking at here, I'm using PowerPoint. You could probably do this with Photoshop too, but I'm not a Photoshop user. So what I started out with is just a solid line. And if I select the line, ask for it to format it, tell it I wanted a gradient line, what I was actually creating here was a rainbow line. If I started out with the first point on the line is red, the second point of the line being yellow, third point to green. What I'm going to do is let PowerPoint do the heavy lifting here. So I don't have to worry about all these individual bitmaps. I've got one extra one, so if I want to do that in purple, and then I'm going to do the last one back to red. So PowerPoint has now generated a gradient line for me, and whatever characteristics I want. I used the rainbow color. You could do it to blue to white or whatever you want. Now, what I want to do is a line that's 1 pixel wide, so it represents 1 warp thread. So now I have my gradient line. Now, one way to view this is if I start from the top and go down, when I'm normally warping, I'd use the same thread. It goes down and then back up again. So the next thing I'm going to do is just duplicate that. And then I'm going to kind of grab the top, flip it around so that this one's going in the other direction. So I'm going to park that over here. Actually, what I want to do is make it the same length as this one. So that now represents, a thread going down and a thread coming up. So what I'm going to do is duplicate, drop that one down here, duplicate this one, drop it. So I've now got a representation of a thread going down, tied on to the other end, comes back up to the front of the loom or vice versa. Now what I want to do is duplicate. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So I've now got 2 copies of the thread, and I want to get those till they're right next to each other. Not on top, but like 1 pixel to the right. Those guys aren't totally straight. And then what I'm going to do is take that pair of threads and duplicate them tab them over and come up a bit. So now I've got 4 threads, and I should be about to the point where as I continue to duplicate, and if I hit the up arrow once in a while when I'm using Control D's to duplicate, so I can kind of create whatever shape I want to in the process here. So in that manner, I've created, looks much nicer up here. Once I've got that guy created, I copy that, and then what I'm actually going to do is come back over to Paint. And I've now got a bitmap I can play with. And I view out on it a little bit. I can select an area where I actually want, and then when I crop it, now I can select the portion of that I actually want to use for a bitmap. That represents what I'm actually going to see on the loom, where this would be the loom waist on one end, this would be down about the beater bar on the other. And if I view that and crop that image, I've now got an image I can save, which the other image I have here is one done a little bit more carefully. And if I zoom in on this one, you can actually see where it starts out blue, fades down through yellows into the reds, and coming back the other direction, it's red into yellows and blues. So I've actually created that gradient line image, and then I saved that as a bitmap. Now when I go back over to Quickdraw, and I look back at the warp, go back to the color screen. Now what I want to do is tell it that's the bitmap I want to use. So I've actually saved that bitmap in the same directory with my program. The other ones here are going to be thread drafts I'll do in a different demo. So if I actually copy the gradient warp, I just did a right click and a copy. I now go into Quickdraw. When this guy's highlighted, it has the image to deal with, so I've set gradient warp 2 bitmap as what I'm going to use for a warp image. Similar process on the weft image. Now in this case what I actually did was I had just rotated that image to the right 90 degrees or left. Now it represents a weft image, so I'd save that. When I was in PowerPoint, again, copy the file name, paste it onto weft. That was the gradient weft. You notice at the bottom down here, the mouse over messages will tell me the file names. I tell it I want to use those images when I do the drawdown. And I go back to the drawdown. I've now actually got that. So the amount of effort you put into that bitmap determines what you see. It overrides the thread colors, but you see how the pattern just kind of comes and goes as the colors mix in the process. So that gives you a fundamental ability to get an idea what a gradient warp is going to look like without driving me crazy. So that's how that's working. Bye now.